Time to talk Florida State Seminoles and everything college football with Pro Football Focus writer Max Chadwick.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. This is my main man from Pro Football Focus, Max Chadwick. How you doing, Max? Everything good, brother?
I'm doing great, Brian. Thanks for having me on again, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Thank you for being a sponsor for us. All right, man, I sent you some questions yesterday. We're just going to have fun with this. Nothing really shocking, I guess you should say, but I'm curious on a few of the questions because everybody has their own opinions on these. So I want to just kind of go through them. At the end, we're going to talk a little Florida State, NFL draft, Patrick Payton, etc. But first question, what do you make of Jaden Rashada suing Billy Napier, Hugh Hathcock, and Marcus Castro-Walker, like implications with NIL, recruiting, how it impacts everybody, including Florida State, obviously.
It's kind of insane, right? Yeah, it's kind of insane. No, I mean, it's one of the craziest stories I've seen in recent memory, honestly. And that's saying a lot considering how much college football's changed recently. So what was like $13.5 million, I think Jaden Rashada is suing them for right now. Obviously, they made a pretty hefty promise to get him to commit to Florida in the first place. And then obviously when he got there and he realized that, the checks were bouncing maybe or something like that, he's like, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. He went to Arizona State, and now he's obviously at Georgia to be their backup quarterback and maybe their quarterback in the future after Carson Beck presumably leaves for the NFL draft after this year. But it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out right now. And obviously the Billy Napier era at Florida has not gone off to a very good start. This is another part of that now. So it's pretty interesting. And I think it just shows in NIL like, hey, it's awesome that these guys are able to get paid. And it's awesome to be throwing out these wild numbers, but you better be able to cash in on that. And you better be able to back it up too. So I think it's kind of helps programs that, are able to stand behind what they offer, and actually give that money to those players instead of just throwing out a crazy number to get one of the top high school quarterbacks in the country. And then when he finally gets there, say, oh, by the way, we actually don't have that kind of money laying around for you. So, it's a crazy story right now, and we'll see how it plays out. But I definitely think it's very interesting to say the least. I thought also that was pretty funny that Kirby Smart gave his blessing, to put it simply, for Rashada to go through with this. But I thought it was a pretty funny anecdote to the story too.
After I'd sent you the list of questions over yesterday, I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking about this scenario, and somebody had found the alleged quote from a text that Napier had sent to Rashada, talking about getting the money. As soon as you sign, we got money. Etc. Like if there was anything even remotely like that, that's because a text is basically a form of a contract, or can be. That gets really, really weird. Because again, for the people that don't know, Rashada is suing three people. He is not, I repeat, he is not suing the University of Florida. It's really odd the way he did it. And I think he's just trying to drag them through the mud to get them to settle out of court, because they don't want this going on. In my opinion, recruiting visits are getting ready to start like full-fledged on the 31st of this month. The last thing Florida needs is people saying you won't pay NIL with recruits coming to campus. That will not end well. So I'm curious if they got any validity with that and how many of those kinds of texts were sent, because that's something that's there forever. Once you hit send, brother, it's over with. So like Napier is probably like, do I really want to do this anymore? Like he's in such a bad spot because like they got the toughest schedule in the country this year too. And just adding this, they might even be able to fire him with cause if they start off bad. So,
they definitely, and this is a big year for him. And I think if they don't make a bowl game, he's probably on his way out. And the problem with that is that they play 6 of my top 20 teams in the country, and there's another 4 teams that are really, really good too that even weren't in my top 20. That I still think Florida might be a little bit worse than, or at least on par with. So, I mean, I'm not saying they're gonna go 1-11, 2-10. But I'm saying if it's disaster, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Because like that schedule is so ridiculously hard. So I think they'll probably win a few games next year, but that schedule is so difficult. And I think Florida's a decent team too. I'm not saying they're a bad team.
Schedule's just not good. Yeah.
That schedule is absolutely. I mean, their last 5 games of the season might be the toughest 5 games I've ever seen in my life. I got to look it up real quickly, but the it's a huge year for Billy Napier, and this is obviously not the way you want to start it
No, they play Miami right out the gate. So
no, they play Miami, and in the last 5 games, they got at Georgia, or excuse me, they play Georgia in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Then they got at Texas, a home against LSU, home against Ole Miss, and then at Florida State. That is a ridiculously difficult schedule. I mean, those are all 4 of them top 20 teams in the country, in my opinion, and like 3 of them are like top 10 teams, in my opinion, as well. So, yeah, it's kind of insane how difficult that last 5 games are. And then they still play Miami, A&M, Tennessee, UCF. Kentucky could be interesting this year. Yeah, it's a brutal schedule for the Gators next year, and this is another controversy for Bill Napier right now at Florida.
The only one out of that back end group that I think will underachieve is LSU. I'm not sold on their defense, but just name recognition, you're right. Like the last 5, like the SEC did one of their hardcore programs no favors.
No.
I mean, and of course, Florida State, that's their choice. It's an out of conference game, but they end with them. Good night. Have Texas on the road and Florida State on the road to back end a 5-game stretch is not how I want to do it. So that's very interesting. All right. Next question here from Max. Number 2, which team on Florida State's 24 schedule is going to make the biggest jump in offensive production, or at least a couple of the teams that you think have a pretty good shot at it? Transfer portal, recruits, guys just getting better, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you look at it right now, like SMU is going to be a really surprising team next year. They got Preston Stone coming back at quarterback, who's one of the top 15 quarterbacks in the country, in my opinion. He's very close to being a top 10 quarterback. So I think that's a good answer right there. I think Miami added a lot of talent in the portal this offseason, obviously with Cam Ward coming in at quarterback, Damian Martinez at running back. I think Martinez is a top 10 running back in the country. I'm not as high on Cam Ward as other people, but he's still a very, very talented quarterback. He's just got to put it all together for a full season. I think Notre Dame, they got a brand new offense this year. So it's going to be almost unrecognizable, Notre Dame's offense this year, with just how much they lost, but also how much they brought in through the transfer portal. So, they have a brand new quarterback in Riley Leonard. They have basically a brand new receiving core as well, with Bo Collins coming in, Chris Mitchell coming in. So yeah, I think Notre Dame's another good answer. They got a great tight end there too, in Mitchell Evans. So, yeah, I think Notre Dame, Miami, SMU. I think those are the schools that I would say probably got the most better at in offense, and those are the offenses that I'm most worried about, I would say, on Florida State's schedule right now. There's some other teams that have some really good players, like Cal has one of the best running backs in the country too, and Jaden Ott. They got Chandler Rogers coming in at quarterback, which I don't even know if he will start, but I really liked him at North Texas last year. So yeah, and obviously North Carolina's got one of the best backs in the country too, and Marion Hampton. But in terms of schools that really, brought in a lot of talent, I think you look at schools like Miami and Notre Dame probably as the 2 schools that really hit the transfer portal hard in terms of getting offensive talent there.
Number 3, Malik Benson, just based on what I saw in the spring and what I'd heard, and I assume most people as well, looks like they're most likely, quote unquote, number 1 receiver. Have you heard anything, or do you think there's going to be a number 2? Or is the rest of the wide receiver corps for the Noles going to be a little bit more by committee?
Yeah, I think obviously, you lost 2 stud receivers for Florida State last year. If you want to even throw Jaheim Bell in that mix too, but you lost Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. It's gonna be a brand new receiving corps next year. And I'm excited to see what Hakeem Williams can do. I think he's got a lot of talent for them, and I think Ja'Kai Douglas too will probably be their starting slot receiver this year. So it's gonna be interesting. I do think Malik Benson's probably the favorite to be their wide receiver 1, obviously transferring in from Alabama. Didn't really do much for them last year. Only had like 166 yards receiving, but he does have a lot of talent. He was his former really highly rated recruit coming out of junior college. So I'm excited to see what he can do as potentially the number 1 option for DJ Uiagalelei next year. But I do think there's some other guys in that receiving core that I'm excited to finally, get their opportunities, and Hakeem Williams and Ja'Kai Douglas too. But yeah, I do think Malik Benson's probably the favorite to be wide receiver 1, but I do think there's some other talent in that room to get excited about too, though.
What I found interesting is they've got multiple guys that are bigger bodied, but they've had some health issues, et cetera, staying on the field that are like senior 50 or senior guys. I don't know which one's going to figure it out, but they got like Hakeem's coming on. So they need to have that guy ready by game 2 or 3. Like their schedule, it's middle to back is more of the big games, but still, SMU, like they play Notre Dame in November, et cetera. they don't have a number two. My concern is if they get into a shootout with a team that can score, that it's going to be hard for Benson to carry because you can just double team one guy. Mm-hmm. That's why I brought up the question. And last year, if you double team Johnny or Keon, you went to the other one, and Jaheim was always single covered. Nobody covered him hardly at all, and he got really not enough credit for how good he was, in my opinion. So that was a good football player that I think Florida State will miss, but Morlock will be good too. Which teams finish in the ACC's top 4 this year? I think I've listened to multiple podcasts on this question, and I get a different answer. I have a different answer too, because schedule plays into it, et cetera. Who do you have as your top 4 in the ACC?
Good question. My top 4 in the ACC, I think Clemson's probably the best team right now. I am worried about their offense a little bit, but I do think their defense is elite, man. They got some really, really good players on the defense. I think they're going to have one of the top defenses in America next year. So I think Clemson there, Peter Woods, the D tackle for them, I think is going to have a massive sophomore season. I think he is. He played sparingly as a freshman, wasn't really, because they had 2 other guys who ended up being NFL draft picks, and Tyler Davis and Ruka Orro. But the guy who I was most impressed by consistently on that D line was Peter Woods. So I'm really excited to see what he can do as a true sophomore next year. He's already, I think, one of the best D tackles in the country as only a true sophomore. So I'm really excited about him. Looking elsewhere, I think Florida State's obviously in that mix too. It's obviously a brand new team. They basically bring in a lot of talent, in a lot of places, and they also lose a lot of talent to the NFL draft, obviously too. So it's gonna be a brand new team, but I still like what they're doing there, and just how well that roster is constructed right now. So I think they're starting to be in that position where they can reload instead of rebuild. Obviously, it might be a little bit of it's not going to be as successful as they were last year, I don't think, but I do think they'll be still a top 20 team in college football probably. So I throw Florida State in that mix. I think Louisville did an excellent job this offseason. The transfer portal, they added a lot of talent in a lot of places. So I think Louisville is certainly going to be, again, one of the top teams in the ACC as they were last year. Ashton Gelati, they brought back at edge defender. He's one of the top edges in the country.
I thought he would go to the NFL and take a shot.
Yeah, me too. Honestly, he's a really good player, and he has a chance to be a first-round pick next year if all goes right for him. So Louisville, I throw in there. And then my last team, I actually will go with SMU. I think SMU is going to be kind of a surprise for a lot of people in the ACC this year. They were one of the top Group of 5 teams last year. Like I said, they brought back a lot of talent, and mainly Preston Stone, their quarterback, who was maybe the best Group of 5 quarterback in the country last year. I think he is a guy, like I said, is close to being a top 10 quarterback overall in America. You can make an argument he might be the best quarterback in the ACC. I mean, he's certainly up there. I'm looking through right now. I probably would say he's the best quarterback in the ACC right now, which is kind of crazy considering they're a brand new ACC team. But yeah, I would say Preston Stone. I mean, you got the best quarterback in the conference, and you got talent elsewhere on that team as well. I mean, yeah, I think SMU, Rhett Lashley's got a really good thing going with that program right now. So I would throw SMU as kind of the surprise team that maybe not a lot of people are talking about right now as the best teams in the ACC. I think SMU is going to be one that's going to surprise a lot of people next year.
So no Miami in the top 4. I find that interesting, but they're a team that has a ton of talent. They're so inconsistent. It's almost maddening trying to rank them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that they'd probably be my number 5 team, honestly. But you said it right there. I mean, like, Cam Ward is just a guy that is such a roller coaster right now that it's like, okay, if he's on, like, they could beat anyone. Oh, yeah. They have a lot of talent. Like I said, they have a really good O-line. They got a great running back now in Damian Martinez, one of the best top 5 receivers in the country, in my opinion, Xavier Restrepo. That defense has a lot of talent too. Ruben Bain Jr., another true sophomore who's an absolute superstar at edge defender. So they have talent. It's really on Cam Ward this year, and whether or not Cam Ward can take that next. And don't get me wrong, he's a good college quarterback. I'm not saying he's a true a roller coaster of a quarterback in college, but I kind of pump the brakes a little bit on anyone who's calling him a first round pick yet, because you got to see more out of him before I think you could do that. And I think he's a great kid. I actually interviewed him last year. He's an awesome guy to talk to, and I'm really rooting for him this year. But there is a lot to be cleaned up in his game right now, and I think he's a little too careless with the football, I think, still in his career as a quarterback. So we'll see what he can do this year. He's got a lot of talent around him, though. I think Miami could definitely, they're kind of the biggest boomer bust team, maybe in college football.
That's what I was going to say.
Certainly the ACC, yeah.
The stat for Ward it just drives me nuts. And I know that Washington State, like, the difference between Washington State's O-line and Miami's is the difference between Mars and Earth. Like, it's just, They gave up 43 sacks, and Ward is super athletic. They must have just been awful. I mean, just terrible. Still, he had 14 fumbles.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've seen a stat that bad for a player with that much physical talent. He was a senior. This year, he'll be a fifth-year senior. So I have them higher. They might win the league. They may be fifth. I can see either one. I would guess they're second or third. I kind of split the middle. But, going by history, I think Ward will cost them a game because of lack of ball security. And that is something that, again, he had 14 as a senior at Washington. It's not the first time he's been told, hey, you need to protect the football, put two hands on. He just doesn't do it. So playing in the ACC, going up against Clemson and Miami and schools like that, or Florida State, he's going to see a lot of D linemen that are nasty. Even though their schedule is not incredible, it's still got some really good players like Louisville's line and stuff like that. I think they could be in trouble in a couple of those games. And he'll probably have one game, though, where he's like the best player in college football that weekend.
Yeah.
And that's why they're so frustrating to figure out.
Exactly. And he actually, so that we have a stat called big time throws, which obviously are huge throws that you can make down the field. And he had 24 big time throws last year, which were tied for 8th in the Power 5.
Exactly.
Like you said, though, over the last 2 years, he has 42 turnover worthy plays, which are the most in the Power 5. So he is very careless with the football in terms of the fumbles are a huge issue with him right now. I think holding onto the ball too long, just holding the ball very, very low. I think that's a problem. And also, he's got a massive arm and one of the top arm talents in college football, which is a blessing and a curse, though, because he can make every throw on the field, but he also thinks he can make every single throw every single time he's out there. So you see him kind of swinging for the fences on every single play rather than taking the singles and doubles when they're there. So that's kind of why you see not only the fumbles, but he throws into tight coverage a lot when he has other open receivers on the field. So he's maybe a little bit too confident in his arm right now, and I think he's got to be a little more rein it in a little bit next year. If he can do that, he's got all the talent in the world to be one of the top quarterbacks in college football and one of the top quarterbacks in next year's draft. It's just about reining that talent in right now and not thinking, hey, I have to go for the home run on every single play.
If he doesn't, that again, it's inevitable. It'll cost the Canes at least one game. That's just something you can't do.
Yeah.
From an overall program perspective, which teams are closest to Georgia? This is just a generic overview of college football. Which teams are closest to Georgia as a program and why?
I actually think I have to redo my rankings pretty soon. I don't even know if Georgia's been number one team next year. I think Ohio State, what they brought in and what they brought back is absolutely preposterous. I mean, they got
all the guys.
They got all the guys coming back. Basically, only Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Hall Jr., Cade Stover, they declared for the draft. But other than that, it's like everybody else decided to come back. Emeka Egbuka decided to come back, the wide receiver. JT Tuimoloau, the edge defender. The other edge defender, Jack Sawyer, also came back. Tyleik Williams came back. I'm trying to think of what else. They brought back Travion Henderson as well. They brought back Denzel Burke, Lathan Rance. They brought back everyone. Then they added Quinshon Judkins, who is, at least in my opinion, the second best running back in the country. You can make an argument for number one. So you brought in Quinshon Judkins to form by far the best backfield in college football next year. You also brought in Caleb Downs, who in my opinion is the best safety.
Tremendous.
Best safety in college football. So you brought him in as well. Then you brought in the number one overall recruit in the country in Jeremiah Smith at wide receiver, who by all accounts is murdering it in spring right now. He might even be their top receiver as a true freshman. There's talk about him being one of the best receivers to come into college in a very, very long time, which for a school that just lost a generational talent in Marvin Harrison Jr. to potentially get another one the very next year and Jeremiah Smith is pretty unfair. And they also brought in Will Howard as well, the Kansas State quarterback, who I like. I don't know how much of an improvement he'll be on Kyle McCord, but he at least adds a dual threat ability that Kyle McCord doesn't have. So I think that ground game for Ohio State is going to be elite. And then also, I mean, you want to talk about ground game. You brought in Chip Kelly as your offensive coordinator.
That might be the biggest one.
Exactly. Like he's one of the top offensive minds. He has an excellent job of scheming up the rushing attack as well. So Chip Kelly willingly left UCLA as their head coach to be a Big Ten offense. He left a Big Ten head coaching job to be a Big Ten offensive coordinator, which I think is pretty funny when you think of it that way. So yeah, Ohio State's really gearing up to be a national championship contender. And honestly, they might be my national championship pick right now. And the other school I'll throw in that I think there's a pretty clear top three in college football with Ohio State, Georgia, and I think Oregon is the last one that I throw in the top three. They brought in Dylan Gabriel, quarterback, to replace Bo Nix, but Gabriel might be my Heisman pick next year. I think he's going to do really, really well in Will Stein's offense. I think you brought in Evan Stewart as well, who's one of the top receivers in the portal from Texas A&M. Very, very talented guy who could be a first-round pick if he finally puts it all together. Tez Johnson you brought back as well, who's a top 4 receiver in college football probably. He's a really, really talented slot receiver. Unbelievable offensive lines returning. You lost Jackson Powers Johnson, but the rest of the offensive line is absolutely elite. So they should have a great O-line next year as well. Great tight end room as well. Jordan James at running back, who's a really, really good running back that I think will replace Bucky Irving really well. Defensively, you brought in Jabbar Muhammad, who is one of the top corners in the country from Washington. So, and obviously Dan Lanning has that program humming right now. So I think Oregon, Georgia, and Ohio State, that is probably my top 3 teams in college football right now, with Ohio State being number 1, Georgia being number 2, and Oregon being number 3.
I have a big difference with you on one thing, and that's I don't trust Will Howard at all. I don't. That's the other players. My concern is just Judkins, from what I've been told about him off the field and even during games. He's not a very good teammate. I'm being unbelievably kind. I just worry about that being a chemistry issue. I'm a chemistry guy, and like some of the things that he said, like he got kicked out of huddles and they were screaming and cussing each other in the middle of games. That's a risk. I'm not saying he can't run because he's great, but that worries me. And then I watched Ohio State spring game. I know there's a certain player at Ohio State already thinks the best quarterback is not the guy they brought in for Kansas State. That is weird, but like, okay, it's one of the receivers, so
it's not a bad problem to have, though. I mean, Will Howard, don't get me wrong. Well, I don't think Will Howard's a terrific quarterback either. I mean, he's not one of my top 10 or 15 quarterbacks in the country, but I mean, they got Will Howard, who's like a capable starter at least. I mean, and then you got Devin Brown, who was a former 5-star. I don't think he'll be the starter, but Julian Sayin, people love him. He was the number 2 quarterback coming out of high school this past year. Maybe he could be an instant back. So it's not like the quarterback room is like lacking in talent. It's just they have a lot of talent of it right now. I agree with you though. Will Howard that's the one thing holding me back from saying, oh, Ohio State's clearly far and away the number 1 team in the country, is that they have a slight question mark at quarterback. And can Will Howard be a quarterback for a national championship team? That I don't know. But the rest of the roster is absolutely ridiculous. And we've seen subpar quarterbacks, win national championships before. I mean, remember like Jay Coker for Alabama. Did really well, and like so there are guys that can lead teams to glory like that. But I think like AJ McCarron too. Like he won 2 national titles. Stetson Bennett won 2 national titles. I mean, they're like backups in the NFL now. So I think Will Howard is kind of in that mold. I think he's a solid quarterback. I don't think he's a spectacular one. That is a little concerning considering how pass happy the game of college football is right now. But like I said, they're going to have by far the best rushing attack in college football next year, in my opinion. So I'm really excited to see what that Ohio State team can do next year.
I think so too. With the running backs, the only concern there beyond what you mentioned is Travion just doesn't stay healthy. That's been his bugaboo. When he's healthy, though, man, he has got jets. That guy, he's running away from about everybody. He's a special player.
And I think the addition of Judkins will be huge for that, right? I mean, he's not going to be a bell cow back anymore. So fewer carries, split carries, keep him healthier, hopefully. So that is the big question with TreVeyon Henderson, is just staying on the field. But I mean, if you add a guy who's even better than TreVeyon Henderson, I think TreVeyon Henderson's a top 6 running back in the country. So they added another top 6 running back in the country, Quinshon Judkins, who I had number 2 behind Ollie Gordon. So I think that's going to really help in that they can kind of split carries, split touches, and hopefully keep TreVeyon fresher throughout the season.
The last question here before we go into a little NFL draft with the Noles. If you were in charge, which college football rules would you make a change to, or maybe create, if you will? Another way to look at it.
Yeah, good question. I think it's kind of the Wild West in college football right now in terms of the portal and NIL.
Kind. That's kind.
Yeah. So I think there's I don't know exactly what I would do to help that, but I do think there's measures that need to be taken in order to kind of rein it in a little bit. So I think that's probably one thing that I would say. Maybe I understand with exams this semester starting, it's really hard to not have the transfer portal, but I really like the transfer portal to be after the season's over, like after the bowl games are over and all that, because it makes the bowl games almost like it makes them really hard to follow. It's like, okay, who's in the portal, who's leaving and all that. it's tough because like there's so many guys that just leave before the season's even over, and I don't know. I kind of want to make bowl games matter again. It was really cool when bowl games used to be this huge deal, and now it seems like just like an exhibition game out there in a lot of them. So I really want to do that. I'm trying to think what else I would do. Yeah, I think those are I think the portal and NIL again. I think they're great for college football, but I think those measures need to be taken in order to kind of rein it in a little bit and just not make it as hectic or extreme as it is right now. Not have the Jaden Rashada situation again. I think is a pretty important one too. So yeah, I think those are the two biggest things going on with college football right now is the portal and NIL, and I think that's the best way to do it is to just take some measures and make it a little less insane right now.
For me, the one that's the biggest, and I know they're complaining about this in a lot of different directions, but you can't transfer more than once, especially without sitting out. It's just there's no sense of a roster with that, and that's what creates more opportunities for cheating. And I know there are people that complain about it. There's been legislation about it, et cetera, but there's no friendly here. The players can't have as much power as they do with transferring in college football, have any consistency, because teams with money like Ohio State can go steal somebody because they can get them immediately. If you have to sit out, it doesn't do them any good. You're going to curb the cheating enormously. So
I think that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, you saw one of the. I mean, Tyler Barron, the Tennessee edge this year, he transferred from Tennessee. So he played Tennessee this past year, went from Tennessee to Ole Miss, then Ole Miss to Louisville, then Louisville now to Miami. So he has been ridiculous. Like 4 schools in like 5 months, basically. I mean, it's kind of insane what some of these guys are doing in the portal right now. So, yeah, I think that's a good point. That I don't know if I would say sit out the whole year if you transfer more than once in your career, or just the offseason is what you're saying.
Well, like if you transfer, if you're going to make it, I don't even like it where you can just transfer. There's got to be some kind of penalty because that's what creates all the cheating is the immediate eligibility. But doing it a second time in your career, it's just an inducement for coaches that have big NILs to go steal guys off teams who don't have it. There's no way to. That's exactly what's happening. I mean, I'm in that world. It's not maybe. It's flat out what's happening.
Yeah.
So I know of a guy that. He wasn't even looking to transfer, but he was offered $500,000 to transfer because he's a defensive tackle and there aren't many of them. He was a role player, $500K. So what does the school that, the smaller school develops a guy, they're just hosed. So I don't like the immediate eligibility for a second transfer at least anyway, but that's just my opinion. Last thing here, I asked on my show yesterday a little buy or sell, and I brought up, will Florida State have a first-round pick in the 25 draft? And there's some possibilities, and a couple are different, but I'm going to pull up the depth chart here. But the one guy that you and I mentioned before the show was Patrick Payton. Walk me through, anybody you want to use a comparison to, et cetera. He was pretty good last year, but let's be honest, most teams, not all, but most teams really just kind of focused. We're blocking Jared Verse. If somebody else beats us, it is what it is. Give me your perception of where he's at, what he would have to do to at least go in the second round, if not the first round.
I think adding strength is the biggest thing for him, right? I mean, he's kind of the opposite of Jared Verse in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Verse is like 260 playing in college. Patrick Payton was 239 last year, so almost like over a 20-pound difference between the two of them. So he's got very, very long arms. He's 6'5", good length as well. It makes helps him in the run game, in stacking and shedding blocks. He had 10 tackles for loss or no gain last year, which were tied for 9th among Power 5 edge defenders. And then also those long arms, man. He bats passes better than anyone else in the country.
He last year, didn't he?
Yeah, he had 10, which were 3 more than any other edge defender in the country. So he is the best edge in the country by a mile in terms of batting passes at the line of scrimmage. So I think adding strength would be huge for him, kind of getting a little bit more developed as a pass rusher. But, I mean, you look at he's not in the first round of our board right now, but if you look at the consensus board, which I know is very, very early to be looking at a consensus board for next year's draft, but he's number 25 overall in the consensus board. So he right now is a top 25 prospect in next year's draft, according to all the big boards and mock drafts that have been put together so far. So he certainly has the capability of being a first-round pick. I just want to see him add a little bit more strength and get a little bit better as a pass rusher to do that. But yeah, I think he definitely has the talent to potentially be a first round pick next year.
That was the guy that I was like, look, this could go one of two ways because like his offseason is everything. But I'm not saying Patrick won't have it, but like he can't have any injuries. He's definitely got to get better in the bench press and all those things. And he's a long arm guy. His bench press probably not the greatest way to do it, but they do put a lot of measurement into that. And he's also just got to be more consistent in the run game, which is strength overall that you mentioned. The guy that I think is kind of a wild card because he transferred is Earl Little. He came in and beat out Greedy Vance at the nickel spot. Greedy's good. And he transferred to Southern Cal. I think his skills, his length, and all that are certainly part of it. Sertan obviously is coaching because he was a kid down in American Heritage. What about him? You got Thomas, the corner. Anybody else like that you think have a chance to at least go in the first couple rounds for the Noles?
I think Patrick Payton's the only one I'm confident saying will be a first 2 days pick. I think Thomas there has the capability of doing it, but I see he's more of a probably day 3 prospect right now. Joshua Farmer, another guy to keep an eye on, I think. Fentrell Cypress, I really like the corner. Let's come back to school. Do too. I think he's a really good player. He could be a draft pick. Marvin Jones Jr. obviously is a really, really talented player, former 5-star recruit. I think he could be a draft pick. So yeah, I think those are some of the guys right now. And obviously DJ Ungolai, see what he could do in his
he's a wild card all the way.
He is a wild card, yeah. So he's got arm talent for days, but it's just what is he gonna do with that, honestly? But yeah, I think Thomas and some of the other guys I just mentioned, Joshua Farmer and Fentrell Cypress, those are the guys I'd probably keep an eye on the most right now in terms of who could be a draftable prospect for Florida State next year.
The guy that I think has a chance because he has the measurables and all that, they got kind of hosed last year is Daryl Jackson, the defensive tackle that transferred from he's 6'6", 300 pounds. I have no idea what he's going to do. I assume he's going to be in shape and motivated. He's a kid that wants to take care of his mom, and that's why he transferred back to Florida State from Miami because he's from the greater Tallahassee area. That's my wild card pick as well. And his get off and his first step quickness for a man his size is pretty impressive. So, well, Max, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. What do you got coming up at Pro Football Focus? What have you been working on?
Yeah, so we're covering kind of on the PFF College Football Show, which I co-host. We're covering the top 10 players at every single position right now. So we're actually going to record receivers in a few hours. So that's going to be really fun. I'm excited to do that. And then also on PFF.com, I'm dropping the 10 players to know at every position in the 2025 NFL draft too. So kind of a little primer for what we should see next April for next year's draft, and kind of the 10 guys to know at every single position. So you're kind of prepared, going into the college football season of, okay, here are the guys I need to know who could be the top players in next year's draft, honestly. So, even though it's the offseason right now, it's never the offseason in the PFF. So we're continuing to churn out content right now, and it's a very, very fun time for sure.
All right, buddy. I thank you very much. Everybody have a great day, and come back and see us soon. This has been Locked On Seminoles.